Black people, we don't like forced diversity. They never asked us though. They never asked us. We want reparations. We want money. They always skip that. They're like, no, you don't. You want to be in Lord of the Rings Part 2. That's what you want. There's never been a group of black men in a barbershop like, hey, you know what, man, dog? I really just want to play Frodo, my nigga.
Good morning. It's Monday, Talk Radio Monday, July the 8th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Talk Radio's America. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Come join hand in hand, brave Americans all, and rouse your bold hearts at fair liberty's call. No tyrannous act shall suppress your just claim, or stain with dishonor America's name. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we live. Our purses are ready, steady, boys, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men our money will give. Our worthy forefathers, let's give them a cheer. Through climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us their freedom and fame. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we live. Our purses are ready, steady, boys, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men our money will give. Then join hand in hand, brave Americans all. By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall. In so righteous a cause, let us hope to succeed. For heaven approves of each generous deed. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we live. Our purses are ready, steady, boys, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men our money will give.
Thank you. And now the headlines.
In for Stu.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and good morning to everyone out there. I'm David Asman, in for Stuart Varney. You'll be happy to know Stuart is going to return tomorrow. Well, Congress returns today, but Democrats are deeply divided about the president's re-election prospects. 4 senior Democrats are now reportedly calling for President Biden to end his re-election bid. But Biden says, quote, only the Lord Almighty can convince him to step down. The next big item on his agenda is the NATO summit. That kicks off in D.C. tomorrow. President Biden is preparing to host high-level talks with NATO leaders, and next week he'll deliver speeches in Las Vegas. It's kind of a counter-programming to the Republican National Convention. Speaking of which, it does convene just a week away. That's when Donald Trump will officially become the party's nominee. Trump also says he is going to announce his VP pick in Milwaukee, but he's been kind of vague about the details of that announcement. To the markets now, the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ are all showing green arrows. It looks like, at least in the beginning of the week, it's going to be a good day. The 10-year, if we can take a look at the interest on the 10-year, it's up a little tick, 0.2 basis points to 4.281%. The 2-year, if we can switch to that, is also up 2 basis points, up to 4.63%. Bitcoin is trading up about $440, up to 57,125. On the show today, overseas celebrations turning into riots in France after a left-wing political coalition secured the most seats in the country's parliamentary election. This was the runoff. The victory coming as an upset to the right-wing National Rally Party last week that led in the first round of elections. And here at home, Hurricane Barron making landfall earlier this morning in Texas. After strengthening to a Category 1 overnight, strong winds and heavy rain battering the state, storm surge warnings and tornado and flood watches are in effect throughout the Gulf Coast. It is Monday, July 8th, 2024. Varney
and that was the headlines. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, I had the occasion to send an email to my congresswoman and for soliciting some constituent service. Usually, people in Congress and senators like to do constituent services because it's a cheap way to buy the loyalty of their constituents. And so I had a problem with Social Security Administration. I filled out their form. I went online, filled out their form, and asked for some assistance. And I received a email back from one of her flunkies named Carrie Lamb, and that basically told me, "No thanks, go do it yourself." She did give me a link to an inquiry form at the Social Security Administration, but again, they were not interested in helping me out. So I sent an email in reply saying that I assumed that the Congresswoman would have liked to have engaged in some constituent service, but apparently I was wrong, and I will keep that in mind the next time I vote. So that's something else when you're thinking about what can I do. Contact your Congress people and ask them to intervene on your behalf to do constituent services of various things. If you have problems with federal agencies, don't hesitate to get in contact with them and ask them to give you constituent services. And if they don't want to, that's something to keep in mind the next time that you are in the voting booth. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the military shorts.
Going to San Francisco, not exactly what you would think should be his best hunting ground, and went to the Bronx, the South Bronx. I don't think even Obama went there, or maybe he did once, but I think the last Democrat was Clinton or Carter or something. I mean, he goes. That's what the Republicans do. They go where you wouldn't expect them to go. They come here. They're not afraid. They're not afraid to take their message to the people who don't agree with them right off the bat.
I mean, it's one of the things that's always puzzled me about those who proclaim themselves to be defending democracy all the time. And I know that they oftentimes are or think that they are, but actual democracy is going out everywhere and trying to get people's votes. And populists, left or right, tend to be pretty good about that. Bernie Sanders will go anywhere, too. He's a left-wing populist, but he will go on Fox News and whatever.
You're
and
right.
Trump will do that, too. And that's to his credit.
Russia says that they are ready to kill French military trainers in Ukraine, with the Kremlin saying no instructor involved in training the Ukrainian military has immunity. It doesn't matter whether they're French or not. And there's no dispute over whether or not Western trainers are legitimate targets. Everyone knows they are, but by announcing this repeatedly, Russia is trying to seed the thought of a rapid escalation that'll lead to nuclear war in hopes of frightening democracies. But currently, Western governments seem generally unfazed by Russia's escalating threats in response to allowing Ukraine to fire into Russia and sending trainers. The head of Germany's defense committee being asked what happens happens if a Russian fighter jet is shot down by a Western weapon in Russian airspace? To which she replied, it only means that Russia will have one less plane. And a Ukrainian politician said, I've been hearing about nuclear escalation since the first day. First it was if Ukraine gets MiGs from Poland, he's going to use nukes. Then it was the HIMARS, then Patriots, then tanks. He's just a bully. And she is right. I mean, at one point, Putin threatened to use nukes over Stingers. And it's his own fault that he's brought about this threat fatigue by constantly drawing these red lines with disappearing ink.
The bomber stream was a saturation attack tactic created by the RAF Bomber Command during World War II. The Germans had aerial defenses known as the Kammhuber Line. It consisted of 3 layers of zones, defended by German night fighter aircraft, guided by Himmelbett controllers within each zone. The Himmelbett Control Center could only handle 2 fighters, enough to defend against individual night bombers. Military strategist R.V. Jones reorganized their bombing groups into streams. The idea was simple. Similar to gazelles or wildebeests crossing a crocodile-infested riverway, the bombers would go en masse on a narrow stretch. Using a GEE navigation system, the bombers fly a long, tight formation in the dark, flying a common route at the same speed to minimize the risk of collision. A typical bomber stream would see 600 to 700 around 10 miles broad and 6,000 feet deep. The first use of the bomber stream was 1,000 bombers against Cologne on the night of the 30th of May, 1942.
Whoever's idea it was to split the screen between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is not serving the president well. Joe Biden asked for this debate. He basically begged for this debate to save his presidency, and he's now harmed it even more. The serious point is the one that people take away from this, which is this is just a man who can't do the job. What's wrong with that, by the way? Can't we admit that? Everybody has a relative who's in a situation like this. I hope Joe Biden lives another 20 years. I just think it should be spent in Delaware ASAP. You and Peter Doocy just said the 2 magic words as to why it's not easy to remove Joe Biden, and it hasn't been easy for the 18 months they should have done it. Kamala Harris. People fear her. The fact that you're even mentioning Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, how are we not mentioning the black woman vice president? It's because she's shed 28 senior staffers, because nobody has confidence in her competence. They are scared about her being the president. And I think that's a very important point here.
I'm assigned to Walk Point. Understand this is my 2nd day in the bush. I knew nothing about Walking Point. I knew nothing. I could barely, manage the heat, manage the weight of my pack, ammunition, all that kind of stuff. A couple hours into it, I came to a hedgerow, and there was one opening in the hedgerow. Even just with 2 days in, I just knew something was wrong. I knelt down, and of course the guys around me, they'd been in country a lot longer than I did. Man, they scattered. My lieutenant, who I had not met, I could hear him yelling and screaming about moving, get moving, go, go, go. And I didn't want to go at all. And all of a sudden there was a tremendous explosion. I remember flying through the air. It landed on my back, and I think I was unconscious. And then I woke up, and the lieutenant's leg was laying next to me, right about this far.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little motivation.
The longest time in the world is the hesitation between thought and action. It can actually be forever. You can hesitate for 1 second to get started on something, a workout, a project, a task, something that you know you should do. You can hesitate for 1 second. That 1 second of hesitation, all of a sudden it turns into 5 seconds, and then 10 seconds, and then 10 minutes. And then just like that, you drifted into the eternity zone. 1 second became an eternity because something that was going to happen is now never going to happen, ever. Why is that? Because you hesitated. So don't take that chance. Instead, take action. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. A body at rest tends to stay at rest. You've had enough damn rest.
You've got to get to the point in your life where you decide, I have had it. I'm tired of being a loser.
I got tired of losing. I got tired of coming up short. I got tired. I want to move to the nicest neighborhood. I want to fly first class. I want to go to Hawaii. I made a decision. Enough is enough. It's showtime. In order for you to go from one level to the next level, in order for any woman to transition, for any man to transition, the thing that they want must be greater than the thing they currently have. Humans do not transition to another level when they're comfortable with the level that they're on. You only go to another level when you say, enough is enough. I want you to live the life you were meant to live. You hear me? Not the life that was given to you. You deserve to see what your life would look like if you gave 120%. And what I need you to do is I need you to look at yourself in the mirror and say, come on, stop playing. I deserve to see what my life would look like if I gave 120%. That's lion mode. And you got to get to a place where you start executing.
Making a freaking plan is the easy part. And you have to understand, if you don't execute on the plan, if you don't get up in the morning when you're feeling tired, scared, if you don't execute, you're not just cheating yourself, dude. You're cheating your family, you're cheating your employees, you're cheating your team, whatever you're a part of. It's bigger than you, man.
And guess what? I had to get up even though it was hard, and I had to take ownership of my life, take ownership of my time, take ownership of my day. And if those of you messed up, why? Because you don't understand think, act, eat, rest. We talking about a schedule. I realized that my strength is in my routine. Why? Because I'm not as strong as I thought I was. I'm not as intelligent as I thought I was. It's in my routine. It's what I do every day repeatedly. The DNA of your success is in your routine. You're not as deep as you think you are. You gotta find a routine. I'm getting up at 3 and stick with it. I'm getting up at 5 and stick with it. Yeah, out of 365 days, we'll have a bad day or two. But I'm trying to tell you, the strength is in the routine. Find a routine and stick with it. No more dreaming. Dreaming is over. I need specifics. What are you doing on Monday? What are you doing on Tuesday? What are you doing on Wednesday? You need to be very specific. It's time to put your piecing together of your puzzle. Nobody gave me this. I earned it. Life wasn't a crystal stair for me. Didn't nobody give me a network. I earned the network. I worked my way to the NBA. I worked my way to the NFL. Everybody say, E, how did you crack the code? I grinded my way through the code. That's how I cracked it. I got up every day at 3. I don't care what the economy is doing. I don't care who the president is. Nobody helped me to get here. I had to get up. I had to go to class. I had to read. I had to study. I had to write. I understood that the dream is real, but the lifestyle is realer. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Stay predictable. Stay consistent. And the reason why many of you are not getting it is because you're not consistent. You start and you stop. You get pumped up. You start strong, and then somewhere in the middle you quit. You have a little success, but you don't experience exponential growth because you're not consistent. You gotta be persistent. You gotta be locked in. You can't scoreboard watch. Too many of you scoreboard watching. Every time you do something, you're looking up to see the score. You stopping working to look at yourself. You're not grinding. You glaring. You should be grinding and you looking at the score. The score is what it is. The score ain't about to change because you looked at it. Keep playing the game. Keep grinding. Keep working. And that other stuff will take care of itself. I'm challenging you to get from where you are. I'm challenging you to stop settling. I'm challenging you to stop accepting the life that was given to you. And I'm challenging you to give 120%. If you're going to do what you say you're going to do, be what you say you're going to be, you're going to have to lion me out. You a gazelle, you're going to come up short. You a gazelle, you're not always going to get what you want out of life. You a gazelle, you're going to have an average experience. You a student, I need you in lion mode. You a teacher, I need you in lion mode. You an entrepreneur, I need you in lion mode. You trying to lose weight? Lion mode. You can't do nothing significant in gazelle mode. Nothing. Nothing impressive happens in gazelle mode. Nothing happens in run mode, give up mode, quit mode, scared mode, fearful mode. Nothing happens. Everything happens in lion mode like I'm coming to get you. You concentrate on this opportunity. You don't worry about tomorrow. You concentrate on this opportunity with all your might, with all your soul, with all your heart. You focus on this. And tomorrow will take care of itself.
Thank you. Now, the Daily Stoic.
The one path to serenity. Keep this thought at the ready at daybreak and through the day and night. There is only one path to happiness, and that is in giving up all outside of your sphere of choice, regarding nothing else as your possession, surrendering all else to God and fortune. Epictetus. Discourses 4.4.39. This morning, remind yourself of what is in your control and what's not in your control. Remind yourself to focus on the former and not the latter. Before lunch, remind yourself that the only thing you truly possess is your ability to make choices and to use reason and judgment when doing so. This is the only thing that can never be taken from you completely. In the afternoon, remind yourself that aside from the choices you make, your fate is not entirely up to you. The world is spinning, and we spin along with it, whichever direction, good or bad. In the evening, remind yourself again how much is outside of your control and where your choices begin and end. As you lie in bed, remember that sleep is a form of surrender and trust and how easily it comes. And prepare to start the whole cycle over again tomorrow.
And that was the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Why is there so much evil in the world? May I say this? That's a very serious argument against God's existence. God is described as the infinitely good. If there's infinite heat, there'd be no cold, right? Then how come there's evil? Wouldn't the infinite good have simply eliminated evil? Thomas Aquinas typically describes God as an artist. What's his canvas? All of space and all of time. We see a little tiny corner of God's canvas. What's he making? He's making something beautiful. Now, beautiful paintings, sculptures, novels, beautiful films involve typically a play of dark and light. It's the rhythm between dark and light that often makes the play or the movie or the painting powerful. God, in his great work of art, permits evil so as to bring about a greater good, so as to produce a more beautiful canvas. At the end of time, when we're in heaven, we will see all of creation like a great book. It'll make coherent sense. But in the course of this life, what do we see? Maybe one part of one paragraph of the whole story. And that's why so often the world as we experience it doesn't make sense.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, if nuclear weapons are a dreadful threat and mankind cannot afford war any longer, then mankind cannot afford statism any longer. Let no man of good will take it upon his conscience to advocate the rule of force outside or inside his own country. Let all those who are actually concerned with peace, those who do love man and do care about his survival, realize that if war is ever to be outlawed, it is the use of force that has to be outlawed, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
4 years later, Hitchcock made Rebecca with Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier. Fontaine, at 21, was taking her first leading role and was horribly nervous about playing opposite Olivier, who was widely recognized as an actor of genius. Another director might have eased her insecurities, but Hitchcock was seemingly doing the opposite. He chose to pass along gossip from the rest of the cast and crew. No one thought she was up to the job, he told her. And Olivier had really wanted his wife Vivien Leigh to get the part. Fontaine felt terrified, isolated, unsure. Exactly the qualities of her character in the film. She hardly needed to act. And her memorable performance in Rebecca was the start of a glorious career.
And that was the 33 strategies of war. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote for somebody else other than Joe Biden because he simply hasn't done anything for you. I'm not talking about how he's not conservative enough or he hasn't balanced the budget or things like that because I know you guys don't particularly care about all that. I'm talking about the things you care about. Number one thing he was going to do that you care about is stack the court. He was going to expand it by 4 seats. by going ahead and getting D.C. to be a state, Puerto Rico to be a state, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever happened to that? He started a committee or commission to study the problem, and that's where all good ideas go to die. And so that's nothing. So now what about single payer? Where are we on single payer? Because isn't it Obamacare supposed to be a step in the direction of single payer? So how come that hasn't happened? He hasn't done anything. What about war? Democrats are supposed to be the party of peace. But he has allowed 2 wars to break out and continue under his administration. So, and then again, what about things like inflation? Going to the grocery store and having to pay more. And nobody can deny that there's inflation because we all go to the grocery store and we all know that the prices have gone up. And that's no good for anybody. So just for those 3 things, why bother to vote for Joe Biden? He hasn't done for you what he promised to do. So you got to vote for somebody else. If you can't bring yourself to vote Republican, then vote Robert Kennedy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Talk Radio's America, Chapter 10, The Democrats Wake Up.
10. The Democrats Wake Up. Congressional Republicans weren't alone in hopping aboard the talk radio train in 1995. Talk radio appealed to the marginalized, who truly needed the medium. And after the 1994 election, that meant House Democrats. They had been 40 years in the majority, their leaders conspicuous on television and page A1. But in the minority, like House Republicans before them, they were starved for media oxygen. The national storyline was President Clinton's titanic clash with Speaker Gingrich and the Republican leadership, which eventually produced multiple government shutdowns in the fall and winter of 1995 to 1996. Congressional Democrats were bystanders, except when they, too, were feuding with President Clinton. If they ever hoped to regain power, they were going to need new ways to reach the public and sway its attention. The project of resurrecting House Democrats fell to Dick Gephardt of Missouri and his team. The mild-mannered, sandy-haired St. Louis native had been majority leader under Speaker Tom Foley. But Foley was one of many high-ranking casualties in the 1994 tsunami, leaving his former deputy in charge of the caucus. Gephardt and his staff concluded that, to recapture the majority, they needed more exposure from media they once considered marginal. That included talk radio. Democratic members who'd never done talk radio outside of their districts agreed and embraced the medium. Talk radio was an undertaking, but, as Texas Representative John Brandt explained, I think we realize we have to take time out to do this. After all, he said, we let the right wing have a free run in the last elections, and it cost us dearly. Gephardt had been on talk shows before, but they had not been a central outlet for him or his caucus. In the wake of the election, though, Democrats ramped up their efforts. Even before the new term kicked off, Gephardt arranged a briefing for colleagues on the importance of engaging with interactive media. Democrats also got tips on handling their radio appearances, and Gephardt's team filled a glaring hole at the staff level by hiring the minority leaders and House Democrats' first ever aide devoted to talk radio outreach. Their man was Fred Clark, who had been a producer for nationally syndicated host Gene Burns. Clark originally had no intention of taking the job. He only agreed to interview with Gephardt's staff because he wanted to get Democratic guests on Burns' show. Clark arrived for his interview acutely aware that Democrats' problems with talk radio included more than ideological disagreement with hosts. When it came to securing the political advantages talk radio had to offer, Democrats simply weren't trying as hard as their Republican rivals. Clark showed Gephardt and his staff, Communications Director Laura Nichols, Press Secretary Dan Salek, and Chief of Staff Tom O'Donnell, the reams of information Republicans sent him every day. He told them how the RNC made his job easier by faxing a daily one-page document listing hot issues and the guests who were prepared to discuss them. Typically, the Democratic National Committee sent Clark information only when he asked for it. Not only did Democrats often fail to reach out, but when they did make overtures, they gave him materials he couldn't use. Long policy memos whose language, methods, and themes didn't fit the talk format. Democrats, Clark concluded, needed to engineer a talk-friendly message by making their priorities clear to hosts and their members available for comment. Achieving this meant challenging the culture among House Democrats who weren't comfortable with talk radio. And for Clark, it meant making his former colleagues' lives easier by giving them access on a silver platter. He arranged a radio actuality line to provide stations with sound bites from House Democrats. He also wired a room in the Capitol to serve as a talk radio cafe, complete with coffee and cookies. During key votes, hosts were invited to broadcast interviews with Democrats from the cafe. Clark booked Gephardt and the rest of his caucus on conservative programs as long as the host was willing to treat them respectfully. Clark also prepared background materials for House press secretaries to help them navigate the booking process. Eventually, he got permission from Nichols to build a portable radio studio so that hosts could broadcast from the Capitol without having to bring equipment or an engineer. Even Republicans had no such facilities in the Capitol. Sometimes conservative hosts would use the Democrats' equipment to talk with House Republicans. But Clark would also supply Democratic guests for them to spar with, injecting some balance into even the most right-leaning programs. The outreach paid off, with more and more Democrats going on air. Many who had never appeared on talk radio before, or who had done so infrequently, proved to be adept repeat guests. Gephardt, who before 1995 had done approximately 2 radio interviews per month outside his district, did 6 to 12 per week in 1995 and 1996. His appearances set the tone, encouraging other members to follow suit. Another source of encouragement was even more important: constituents. Clark won friends in the caucus in no small part because members couldn't ignore talk radio's grip on voters. Members would go home and hear constituents parroting Limbaugh's lines. House Minority Whip David Bonnier recalled one such instance. As the Democratic point person responsible for attacking Gingrich over ethical lapses, he had come on Limbaugh's radar and earned himself an unflattering nickname. Playfully conveying how unthreatening Bonnier was, Limbaugh took to calling him the Pit Yorkie. Once, parched after a summer labor rally in Decatur, Illinois, Bonnier went to a local bar where he heard one blue-collar patron turn to another and say, "That's the Pit Yorkie." On several other occasions, people stopped him to ask, "Aren't you the Pit Yorkie?" While Clark was getting House Democrats airtime, the members themselves were trying to make their messaging more appealing, building on an effort that Gephardt had launched after his failed 1988 presidential campaign. Representative Rosa DeLauro, who co-chaired the new messaging operation, encouraged her colleagues to make 1-minute floor speeches, reach out more aggressively to the media, and hold attention-grabbing special events. Talk radio fit into this strategy. When, in 1995, Democrats wanted to protest proposed cuts to the National School Lunch Program, they held a media event including celebrity endorsements, daily floor speeches, Save the Children ties and scarves, and a talk radio blitz. They organized another blitz that year to contest Republicans' proposed cuts to Medicare and other budget items. But even when congressional Democratic outreach to talk radio was at its peak, tension lurked beneath the surface. Salek recalled that while Clark always advocated more engagement with talk radio, Many communications staffers were less enthusiastic. To them, the challenge was not to equalize the message on talk radio, but to work around it, to counter-program in a way that got House Democrats' message out on the airwaves. Talk radio had yet to complete its evolution into a doctrinaire, far-right medium preaching to the converted. But Democratic staffers understood as well as anyone that the listenership leaned conservative. There were more effective ways to reach the voters they most wanted to connect with. Despite the efforts of Clark, his successors, and a core group of members, Democrats struggled to overcome Republicans' talk radio advantage. Julianne Corbett Waldron, who took over from Clark as radio coordinator, felt her caucus was no less available to talk radio than Republicans were. Yet hosts seemed to think Republicans were more accessible. Talkers didn't call Republicans for taped radio actualities. They got live guests. Host Tom Likas explained that Democrats were just too reticent, too picky. When you call the average Democrat, they say, "Who's going to be on the show? What's the subject? Are you going to be taking calls?" I don't know. And then their aides tell you, "I can get him on a tarmac on a cellular phone for a couple of minutes before he takes off, but no calls. And he wants to talk about this transportation bill that's coming up." The sense of frustration was mutual. Democrats, including Gephardt, felt that they rarely received a fair hearing on talk radio. The effort of trying to have a rational conversation didn't seem worth it, and over time they became harder to coax into appearances. Corbett Waldron and her successor, Kimberlyn Love, found many in their caucus hesitant to appear with conservative hosts. DeLauro observed that going on talk radio required a junkyard dog mentality her colleagues often lacked. They didn't run for Congress to engage in on-air Donnybrooks. She also noted that the failure to recapture the House in 1996 and 1998 disheartened many members and prompted doubts about the new messaging strategy. The intense media push seemed to be going nowhere. In interviews, members attuned to the value of communications suggested that their colleagues failed to understand the connection between power and public messaging. Representative Pat Schroeder retired in 1997 in part because she believed that her colleagues' refusal to focus on messaging ensured the party would be unable to regain and maintain congressional majorities. And while messaging failures are not the sole culprit, her prophecy has proven correct, as Democrats controlled the House for just 4 of the 24 years between 1994 and 2018. On the other side of the Capitol, the relationship between Senate Democrats and talk radio unfolded similarly. When Tom Daschle of South Dakota, a prairie populist and, by Senate standards, a boyish 47 years old, became Democratic leader in 1995, he and his staff realized that they were a beat or two behind Republicans in using radio. They also understood that it would no longer suffice for senators to communicate with their constituents through recordings. Radio was now a two-way medium, not just a source for top-of-the-hour newscasts. Daschle and his staff built a radio studio and initiated other upgrades to enhance senators' ability to converse with their constituents in real time. But technology wasn't the only problem. Daschle sensed that his colleagues wanted proof that they could succeed on talk radio before fully engaging with the medium. As staffer Laura Quinn recalled, most senators viewed talk radio as hot and hostile. Roger Lotz, a radio producer newly hired by the Senate Democratic Technology and Communications Committee, initially had great difficulty convincing senators or their protective press secretaries that they should appear on conservative talk programs. Quinn and Lotz would have to persuade senators that most hosts would be polite and respectful to interviewees, even if they disagreed. By 1997, their encouragement had begun to pay dividends. While buy-in from senators varied widely, some got used to the medium and readily grappled with hosts from across the ideological spectrum. Stalwarts such as North Dakota Senator Byron Dorgan appeared routinely on conservative programs seeking alternative voices. Others were willing to do radio and prepared thoroughly, but were more reactive than proactive in seeking on-air opportunities. It may come as a surprise that Joe Lieberman was one of the Senate Democrats' true champions of talk radio. The senator from Connecticut exposed a dry, buttoned-down speaking style during the 2000 and 2004 presidential campaigns, but he was good on radio. He appeared weekly and even spoke at a national radio convention. He had been joining talk shows at least since his successful 1982 run for state attorney general. Lieberman enjoyed chatting with hosts, and they liked having a guest who got the rhythms of the medium. He had a quick sense of humor and, according to his former communications director Jim Kennedy, could mix it up and avoid being too stiff or resorting to talking points. Lieberman appreciated talk radio as a tool for communicating with constituents. Radio fit Lieberman's personality better than did television, which precluded viewer feedback and cut everything down to brief sound bites. While Lieberman could do short soundbite environments or the partisan back and forth of cable television, Kennedy didn't think his boss was a crossfire kind of person. On talk radio, by contrast, the senator could speak expansively about issues to a large audience in a conversational format, which was more conducive to his style of presentation. As Lieberman himself put it in a discussion of talk radio, it gives you a chance to show the range of your personality. Lieberman accepted the challenge of talk radio without equivocation and endeared himself to hosts across the ideological spectrum. For instance, he turned out to be a favorite of equal opportunity critic Don Imus, although he didn't start out that way. A month into Lieberman's Senate career, an Imus producer attempted to book him, but one of the senator's staffers, Kathy Scarra, turned down the request. She didn't know who Imus was, and she was put off by the producer's demanding inquiry. However, as she was on the phone declining the interview, Lieberman's chief of staff, who was familiar with Imus, came over and tried to get her to stop talking. According to Scarra, he said to her with a panicked look, "Oh my God, he's recording everything you said." The chief was petrified because Scarra had basically dissed Imus's producer, and he would get back to his boss. Sure enough, the next day, Imus launched into an on-air rampage about Kathy something unpronounceable, who works for Lieberman, who thinks he's too good to be on my show. Calls flooded into Lieberman's office. When word of Imus's sharp criticism reached the senator, he bristled and insisted on appearing on the show. It turned out to be just the right move. Not only did Lieberman join Imus on the air, but the two developed a rapport, and the senator became a frequent guest. Later, Lieberman unofficially hosted Imus when he broadcast from Washington. Lieberman's team showed Imus and his sidekicks around the Capitol and took him to lunch in the senator's dining room. Thereafter, Lieberman would continue to welcome Imus whenever he visited D.C. Lieberman also chatted with many conservative hosts, including Hannity. During Glenn Beck's shock jock days in New Haven, Lieberman made campaign stops bearing lox and bagels. Such appearances reflected and reinforced the friendly reception Lieberman received from conservative radio. His comfort with the medium and his respect for his conservative and independent supporters. It also spoke to Lieberman's standing as a different kind of Democrat. While he compiled a liberal voting record, he was far from doctrinaire and agreed with conservatives on a few issues, except on foreign policy and cultural topics. Not every senator would join Lieberman or Dorgan on rough-and-tumble conservative programs, but Quinn understood that it was better to appear than not. She tried to teach members and their staffs that hosts would treat guests well, but also would abuse Democrats who declined bookings. Democrats who stayed away would get far worse than colleagues who took their lumps in person and fought back. She refused to blacklist conservative hosts, because abstaining from a show left its airwaves without the Democratic message. If members wouldn't appear, she would find surrogates. Quinn did a lot of this kind of outreach, pitching topics and guests to hosts, most of whom were receptive if she offered a smart and credible interviewee on a hot topic. At the very moment when congressional Democrats were most enthusiastic about talk radio, albeit with many reservations, President Clinton's outreach effort was foundering. In the second half of Clinton's first term, the scope and vision of his radio strategy narrowed, and tensions with hosts continued to mount. The mechanisms by which the White House communicated with talk radio remained largely the same, and Richard Strauss and his successors as radio director, Rika Rodman and Megan Maloney, used the medium strategically. They were still able to secure the president's time when they needed it. For instance, Clinton did roundtables with agricultural and urban radio. But the emphasis on the medium faded. This decline was epitomized by a debate among Clinton's staff over whether he should do a proposed talk radio town hall with middle-of-the-road host Larry King. The town hall had been proposed by radio impresario Norm Patitz, the chairman of the board of syndication giant Westwood One, who in 1995 met with DNC chair Don Fowler, and subsequently President Clinton himself, to discuss how Democrats might achieve more ideological balance on the medium. Though the White House initially agreed to the event, dissension emerged among staff, delaying the town hall and leading a frustrated Patitz to fire off a memo warning of the consequences of canceling. Press Secretary Mike McCurry, who joined the White House in 1995, was one of the main sources of Patitz's irritation. On an internal memo, McCurry commented that he had tried several times to put the town hall off to 1996. He made his disinterest abundantly clear. We have other priorities now, and there is no reason press-wise to do this in the middle of a POTUS vacation, or in 1995 for that matter, he wrote, underlining no reason twice. If we have to do this for political or money reasons, I'll understand. But we have higher press priorities at the moment. McCurry's attitude was fairly typical among staffers who joined Clinton's team in the second half of the first term and beyond. The big question was how best the White House could drive the news cycle, and they didn't see talk radio as a significant part of the answer. Clinton's earliest aides had seen firsthand how the 1992 campaign had capitalized on talk radio. But new aides without this campaign experience tended to view talk radio as intractably hostile and far down the media hierarchy. Even successful talk radio messaging wasn't going to dominate water-cooler chatter. Aides' views only hardened with time, as the scandals surrounding President Clinton mushroomed and the White House's needs and talk radio's interests further diverged. President Clinton himself grew frustrated with the increasingly conservative direction of talk radio, and with hosts' efforts to hamstring his initiatives. In a June 1994 radio interview, he accused talk radio and conservative Christian commentators of using misinformation and demeaning personal attacks to create a culture of cynicism that made governing more difficult. Much of talk radio, he bemoaned, was a constant, unremitting drumbeat of negativism. The president lamented that, what he got off the air, Limbaugh would have 3 hours on the same station to say whatever he wanted without submitting to rebuttal or any sort of truth detector. These remarks delighted Limbaugh. He was getting under the president's skin. After the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, Clinton accused media personalities of essentially inciting violence through their hateful rhetoric. He didn't mention talk radio specifically, and his aides insisted that his criticism was aimed at the media broadly. But there can be little doubt of his true target, as journalists reporting on the issue, and hosts themselves, understood. The coverage at the time singled out talk radio as the object of the president's ire. At the very least, the loud and angry voices Clinton decried could be heard on the AM dial. The medium was still well suited to Clinton's talents and political style, and the president respected talk radio's special capacity to reach voters and drive conversation. But by the time of his re-election, that conversation was running decidedly against him. Conservative media was only getting started. In Clinton's second term, a new antagonist would emerge in the form of Fox News. The content, style, and verve of talk radio were coming to cable, inaugurating another chapter in the right-wing press's decades-long transformation of the Republican Party.
And that was Chapter 10 from Brian Rosenwald's Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States, read by Christopher Grove. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.